Shanann Watts was the kind of woman who always stayed active. She believed in routine, in planning, in building a life that felt secure. She was 34 years old, energetic and outspoken, with a bright smile that showed up in almost every photo she posted. She was the kind of person who kept things organized, family schedules, health routines, and social media updates. But more than anything, she loved her children. Bella, just 4 years old, and Celeste, only 3. And she was 15 weeks pregnant with a third child, a boy. They had already picked a name, Nico. She lived with her husband, Chris Watts, in a spacious, neatly kept home in Frederick, Colorado. The neighborhood was quiet, safe, and suburban. The kind of place where people mow their lawns on weekends and wave at neighbors across the street. From the outside, everything about the Watts family looked happy. Smiling photos, family vacations, pregnancy announcements, all of it painted the picture of a loving, growing family. Chris worked as an operator in the oil industry. He was calm, soft-spoken, the kind of man who rarely raised his voice. Friends described him as easygoing. Shanann spoke about him often. In her Facebook videos, in conversations with friends, she called him a great dad, a hard worker, a supportive partner. But things were not as perfect as they seemed. In the months leading up to August 2018, something in Chris began to change. He started going to the gym more. He became distant. Shanann felt it. She would text him and sometimes get short, robotic replies. He was distracted, cold. She asked him if something was wrong and he said no. But the emotional gap between them was growing every day. What Shanann didn't know was that Chris was having an affair. The woman's name was Nicole Kessinger. They worked together. She was younger, single, and unaware of the truth. Chris told her that he was separated, that his marriage was ending. He was living a double life, playing the part of a father and husband at home, while slipping deeper into a secret relationship behind the scenes. That summer, Shanann took the girls to North Carolina to visit family for several weeks. Chris stayed behind in Colorado. She thought it might help the marriage. Time apart, time for him to miss her. But during those weeks, he got closer to Nicole. He took her out to dinner. They went on trips. He lied more and more. Not just to Shanann, but to Nicole too. He made it seem like he was already free. Shanann returned to Colorado in the early morning of August 13th. She had been away for several days on a business trip in Arizona. A friend named Nicole dropped her off at around 1:48. Home security footage caught her walking up to the front door, carrying her suitcase. It was dark, quiet. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. That was the last time anyone ever saw her. Later that morning, Nicole tried to call her. Shanann had a doctor's appointment she was excited about, a checkup for the baby. She never missed appointments. But there was no response. More texts, more calls, still silence. By late morning, Nicole was deeply concerned. She drove to the house. Shanann's car was in the garage. Her shoes were by the door, but no one answered the bell. She called Chris, who said Shanann had taken the girls to a friend's house. Nicole didn't believe it. Something was wrong. Chris came home shortly after. He looked composed, not anxious. He unlocked the house and let the police inside. They searched the rooms. Shanann's purse was still there, her phone too. The girls' medications were untouched. Their beds were made. There were no signs of a break-in, no blood, no mess. It was like the family had vanished into thin air. Chris told police they had argued that morning. He said she was emotional and had probably left with the girls. But the story didn't sit right. His effect was flat. No panic, no real urgency. Detectives asked more questions. His answers became mechanical. The next day, police brought him in for questioning. He agreed to a polygraph test. He failed. It was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Chris Watts sat in the interrogation room with his arms folded and his voice steady. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't crying. He looked calm. Too calm. Investigators had already searched his home. They'd reviewed his phone records. They had noticed inconsistencies, so they asked him to take a polygraph. He agreed. The test didn't go well. The examiner told him straight, "You're not telling the truth, Chris. This test shows that." For hours, detectives pushed. They asked where Shanann was. They asked where the girls were. He gave nothing. He repeated the same story, that they had an emotional conversation that morning. and that when he left for work, Shanann and the girls were still at home. Finally, Chris asked to speak to his father. When his dad entered the room, Chris's body language changed. He bent over, lowered his voice, and said something that shifted the case forever. He said he had killed Shanann. At first, he claimed that he only did it because she had smothered their daughters, a story that was not only false, but deeply manipulative. It was his last attempt to control the narrative, to paint himself as reacting to an unthinkable act. But the truth was even darker than that. Over time, the full story came out. In the early morning hours of August 13th, after Shanann returned from her business trip and went to sleep, Chris got out of bed and made a decision. He later said they had argued, that she accused him of cheating, and that she threatened to take the children away from him. But none of it justified what he did next. While Shanann lay in bed, likely exhausted from travel and pregnancy, Chris climbed on top of her and began to strangle her. She fought back. While Shanann lay in bed, likely exhausted from travel and pregnancy, Chris climbed on top of her and began to strangle her. She fought back. He told investigators that she didn't scream, that she didn't put up much of a fight. But medical reports showed signs of a struggle. She knew what was happening. All of this happened while their daughters were asleep in the next room. Once Shanann was dead, Chris wrapped her body in a sheet and dragged her down the stairs. Bella, the older daughter, woke up. She saw her father and asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" He told her that Mommy wasn't feeling well. Chris placed Shanann's body in the backseat of his work truck. Then he brought the girls out of the house and put them in the truck with their mother's body beside them. They were still wearing their pajamas. For the next hour, Chris drove to a remote oil site owned by the company he worked for. The girls sat in the back, next to the body of their mother. At some point during that drive, they must have known something was wrong. The questions they asked, the fear they felt, it's something we'll never fully understand. When they arrived, Chris first took Cece, the younger daughter. He smothered her with her favorite blanket. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She was 3 years old. Then came Bella. Bella was older, more aware. She had seen too much. She knew. Chris said she asked, "Is the same thing going to happen to me as Cece?" He didn't answer her, but she fought back. Chris later told police that Bella's last words were, "Daddy, no." He smothered her too. After killing his daughters, Chris pushed each of their small bodies through the narrow openings of 2 separate oil tanks. Then he dug a shallow grave in a field nearby and buried Shanann's body. He covered the spot with dirt and returned to work as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, he texted with friends. He acted normal. He waited as people searched for his wife and daughters, knowing exactly where they were. He had erased them, not in rage, not in a moment of heat, but step by step, calmly and deliberately. A field technology while getting in the way of the world was holding a barely several cracked. The investigators now knew the truth, but they still had one last job left: to recover the bodies of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Chris led police to the oil site where he had buried them. It was an area he knew well. He had worked there. He had chosen it carefully, knowing it was far away, isolated, and surrounded by fields and tall grass. The same truck he had driven to work that day had carried not only tools and gear, but his entire family. When authorities arrived at the scene, what they found was horrifying. 2 massive oil tanks stood on either side of a dirt lot. High off the ground, each had a small opening at the top. Inside one tank, they found Celeste. Inside the other, Bella. Both of them had been pushed through the narrow hatch, their tiny bodies submerged in crude oil for over 2 days. It took hours to recover them. Nearby, a few hundred feet away, they found a shallow grave. Shanann's body had been buried without care. Still wrapped in the sheet Chris had used to carry her from the house, she had bruising around her neck, and her unborn son, Nico, had died along with her. The medical examiner confirmed what the investigators already knew. All 3 had been murdered by smothering or strangulation. Bella had signs of defensive wounds. She had bitten her tongue, possibly during her struggle to breathe. She had fought the longest. When the news went public, the reaction was swift. The country was in shock. People couldn't understand how a father, a husband, could commit such a horrific act. The smiling photos of the girls haunted everyone. The soft-spoken face of Chris Watts, who had once appeared on camera begging for their return, now appeared in mugshots. Chris was arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with a dead body. He faced the death penalty. But Shanann's family, already broken by grief, requested that prosecutors take it off the table. They didn't want to endure a long trial. On November 6, 2018, Chris pleaded guilty to all charges. At his sentencing on November 19, the courtroom was silent. Shanann's family read emotional statements. Her father spoke about his daughter's kindness, her strength, and how she had trusted the man who destroyed her. Her brother broke down in tears. Even the judge said it was the most inhumane and vicious crime he had ever seen. Chris didn't cry, he didn't speak. He sat still as the sentence was read. 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 for the murders, 2 more for the deaths of the children, plus 84 more years for other charges. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, where he remains today. He spends most of his time in isolation. No visitors, no future, just silence. But the echoes of what he did continue to haunt the town of Frederick, and everyone who followed the story. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico. 4 innocent lives taken by the one person who was supposed to love